Yeah. Hello again, and welcome to another edition of Ephlux Insights. My name is Babar Khan. I'm the entrepreneur in residence for this program. Today we have Professor Misek. I'm mispronouncing it, I'm pretty sure. Misek from IMD Business School. He's a professor of strategy, and he's also the author of, wait for it, Social Strategy, semicolon. How do we profit from social media? Thank you for being on the program, Professor. And for clarity, because I know I mispronounced it, how do I pronounce your name?
It's Mikolaj Piskorski.
There you go. So guys, remember that one. And first of all, I was just mentioning this to the professor that it's hard to find professors in the academia world or in the top 10 universities of the world who take social media seriously or think we should take it seriously, and B, are teaching it. So he is a first. We can definitely agree on that. MIT's got some courses, but they don't have anything on social media and social strategy and how the different platforms have different objectives and how you should adjust your strategy according to that. So that's something you can find in his new book. You can also find his publications online. We'll be sharing those links in the description. And now we'll go into the first question. First of all, thanks for joining the program, Professor. And go into the first question. So how big is this phenomenon of social?
So it's really big. When many people get asked this question, it's always considered to be a bit of a fad. We always think that social media is here because it's sort of nice and cool, but it's not going to go for very long. But the numbers actually show something very different. So I just wanted to show you a little bit of what I found. So if you actually think about how many of us are on the internet right now, there is about 2.5 billion of us on the internet. A lot of us are actually as being internet users, are actually in China. So China alone accounts for 24% of the internet users. Rest of Asia, including India, is obviously accounting for a lot, and North America and Europe are sort of a shrinking part of the population. So it's a global phenomenon, the internet use. And when you actually see what people do, internet versus other media, you see that in 2013 was the first year when we actually spent more time watching TV than, being on the internet than watching TV, right? So it surpassed the main sort of media that we had been using. Now internet is the main medium, and we watch or use internet for over 4 hours every day. Of course, a lot of that is driven by mobile. And then when you actually do look at what we do on during those 4.5 hours, full 22% of this time is taken by interacting with other human beings on social platforms, which is just a little bit more than when we search, read, and email. So an hour a day, and a colleague of mine always reminds me that we don't probably spend more than an hour a day, when we're trying to get dressed and wash ourselves and so forth. So this is, it's become a basic sort of thing that we've been doing in our lives. And it used to be the case that, social media was something that teenagers would use, or people in their 20s. And as you see from this diagram, this has now become a very, very broad phenomenon across the different age group. So you see something like 55% of people between 55 and 64 now use social media more frequently than once a week, right? And mostly to interact with their family. So it has become not only a global phenomenon, not only a phenomenon in terms of how the amount of time over an hour a day, but also very, very broad across very different set of groups.
Okay, great. And so what, in your opinion, how can people properly, people and companies, how do they use the various online social platforms across the world? And your experience with the developed and the developing markets, the reasons they do it in terms of objective-based, and what is the best way to reach those objectives that you have worked with or consulted on?
Absolutely. So this is a very broad question. So let me cut it into a few pieces. So I think you really need to discriminate for if you are a company trying to use social media, and you really need to discriminate and understand which market you're operating in. So let me start with some of the Western markets and then move maybe to China, which is a very interesting ecosystem that's separate from the rest of the internet. And I think one of the very frequent things that I see companies do on social platforms is they broadcast, right? So they set up their Facebook page, they set up their Twitter handle, and they use it to actually broadcast information to consumers. The problem with this approach is more often than not, this approach actually doesn't work very well because, as we saw, a really big part of the reason why people are there on these social platforms is to really hang out with their friends. And so most people really understand that companies are not their friends, and as a consequence, really ignore messages from these companies, right? So another way of thinking about it is to always give this example that imagine that we're actually sitting here having a great conversation, the 3 or 4 more of our friends would be here, and we'll be having a lot of fun, and suddenly somebody pulls up a chair and tells us, hey, can I sell you something, right? And we would be probably offended by that, and in the same way that we're offended when companies try to broadcast to us on social platforms. So some of the most successful examples of companies that I've seen that use social platforms actually stop themselves from broadcasting to people and get into the business of actually facilitating interactions with people, and that approach is much more powerful. So if you look at some of the examples of companies like American Express or Nike, one of the amazing things that they do is they build platforms that are connected to Twitter and Facebook, but they are sufficiently differentiated so they actually allow people to engage in interactions with each other. So a great example of that is Nike. Nike has built a platform that allows runners and people who enjoy sports to actually interact with each other and compete with each other and basically challenge each other, and that allows them to bring people closer to each other. And then in return, what people do is they actually advertise Nike to friends and strangers, and Nike was actually able to grow their business by about 30%. Particularly their the running shoe business has been very, very successful as a consequence of greater exposure on social media. Similarly, even a company like Cisco. Cisco is in the business of routers and switches, a B2B business, a business where most people think you can't apply social media. They have actually developed their own platform for the engineers who use these routers and switches and put them together into networks to actually interact with each other and help each other and troubleshoot together. And that has really helped Cisco in generating much more commitment from them, such that when a competitor from China moved into the United States and tried to sell these same routers for a much lower price, these engineers actually refused to join that platform because for them the social element of the company was much more successful. Second part of your answer is sort of thinking about how you'd actually tackle yourself overseas, and particularly in China. So China doesn't have access to a lot of the foreign networks, so they've developed their own, but what also a lot of developing countries do not have, and China is a great example of that, is a very well-developed infrastructure. And it shows up in 2 different places. The first place where it shows itself is distribution. So offline distribution is quite difficult, particularly in a country like China, but also in India, right? There is no sort of long-distance freeways in the same way that you have in other countries, although of course China is building them very rapidly, and there is no company that has orchestrated a global distribution system in those countries. So what ends up happening is a lot of companies go directly to e-commerce to sell directly to customers, so they don't actually have to develop their offline infrastructure. But there's the other problem, of course, because e-commerce helps on the distribution side, but you have to also have the advertising, and advertising in China is very expensive and also quite fragmented. And what you see, therefore, companies do is they actually use social media and broadcast to the customers their information about kinds of products that they should buy, and also rely quite extensively on key opinion leaders to drum up the demand. So what you find is that what works really well in countries like China and India is this combination of e-commerce connected with social media and actually using the broadcasting properties of social media in these countries to actually drive business. And I have written many cases. A great example of that is a company called Reckitt Benckiser that actually changed its entire strategy of selling condoms in China which is actually quite difficult to sell anywhere. You know, it's a very sort of taboo topic for many people, and they've actually been able to get people to talk about these sorts of things on the internet and actually drive a lot of sales. So if I were to summarize my very long answer, because you asked me this long question, is I would say that for the well-developed markets where the sort of the infrastructure exists in great, in great abundance, social media doesn't add that much in comparison to what's already out there. So what you need to use social media for is new forms of marketing that you were not able to achieve in the offline world, like person-to-person marketing and word-of-mouth marketing, and really put it on fire and really make it really much more efficient. In more countries that are developing very rapidly, but where you don't see the distribution channels as powerful, and you don't see the marketing channels to be so well developed, what you want to do is you actually want to use social media to actually make your message really well known and widely heard in ways you couldn't do that in the offline world.
Okay, great. That's a good answer. Actually, it's quite long, but it's a good answer.
Yeah, sorry.
I like how
you asked me all these questions. I just needed to give you a detailed answer.
Yeah, absolutely. So in a lot of your work, like I was mentioning earlier, a lot of your work talks about, well, not exactly the sharing economy, but the idea that the companies that will succeed in the future are the ones that will connect people together, especially in this particular case. Like the Cisco example is quite amazing. The engineers that they would end up selling to are being connected on a network with possibly not even their existing customers, maybe people who are transitioning towards that. So it becomes something like a core type network where people are coming together and asking each other questions that they may not have been willing to ask in the past.
Absolutely.
So a lot of companies can do this, but in the B2B context, how would you, off the top of your head, if something like a management consulting firm, Accenture, would come to you and say, we need a social strategy along the lines of the peer-to-peer network, along the lines of probably facilitating interaction within the customer base, wouldn't that affect it, and how would you adjust your way of thinking for a company like that? Accenture, be it McKinsey, be it Boston Consulting Group, these organizations, and just to add on to that, what they currently do in terms of their social media strategies, first of all, they've got their websites, so that's all fine. In terms of social media, they use from the most part that I've seen, they use Facebook for employer branding to push the idea that our consultants are the best, our workplace is the best, etc. Twitter is usually a medium for here's a link to our thought leadership, and that's more or less it. They don't really engage back and forth with people. There's no talking to consultants from outside of organizations. And LinkedIn is used as a much larger version of the same employer branding concept, but more about this is our USP, and this is how USP connects to employer branding. So keeping these things in mind, how would you change the game in terms of how consulting organizations would brand themselves and market themselves on social to gain the maximum return on investment, be it employer branding, be it customer acquisition?
Right. So notice that what's very interesting about all of the examples that I've given you is, and it's what I found in my research, is that there's two strategies, right? The first strategy is to leverage the existing social networks, social platforms, and just run with the tools that they give you. And this is the sort of the strategy that you outlined. But the other thing is to think about what can I do that's very unique to my company and link it with what's already out there in terms of Twitter and Facebook, right? So Cisco developed its own platform, which is still connected to LinkedIn, right? But they've sort of made sure that the people that they want to target are inside of their own platform, right? Same thing with American Express. I can give you other examples of companies that have all kind of built something that's unique to their endeavor, right? And in some ways, the reason why this approach works much better is not surprising, because we know just from basic strategy that things that work best are things that are unique to your company, right? Because something, if I'm doing something but my competitor is doing the same thing, it can never be a source of competitive advantage. So you need to think about how you're doing something very unique, right? So, what I would recommend for these companies, and I hate to give free advice to consulting firms that, are rich enough to pay for it, but I'll run with it for a second, is to start thinking really about, is there anything that we can do to help our customers talk to each other, right? So I think that's the sort of the key to thinking about how you build social platforms in the B2B space, is to recognize that even though you're actually selling to the corporation, the end user of what you're selling is actually a real human being who may want to talk to other users. So to the extent that they can actually start thinking about, okay, well, we have customers in one industry who are facing one set of problems, and then we have customers in another industry and they're facing another very similar set of problems. We can actually help both of them, but we can also help them to talk to each other, so they can actually, under our umbrella, help each other solve problems, and we can actually step in to help them too, right? But they can have a much richer and better conversation than we can with them, and we can, on the basis of that conversation that we observe with the between our customers, we can actually step in and say, oh wow, we've actually learned something about our customers that we did not know, and here's how we can step in and help sell our business. So I would say that is sort of the key to what those guys should be thinking about when it comes to using social media.
Yeah, there's a company in LA. Obviously, everyone's heard of it, called Adobe Systems. So they came up with something about a few years ago called the Adobe Marketing Cloud. It's got this analytics and front end and back end capability to track your entire marketing campaign. It's got this core component within it called the Adobe Experience Manager, which does more or less the same thing, and it's very colorful and gives you insights, gives you the why and the conversion, open mail rate, etc., all aspects of digital and social. And what they did was they created a website called CMO.com, and they've got all these articles pouring in from various thought leaders. And in the initial phases, they didn't mention that they were dope. I mean, if you went into the one thing that no one else does, which is go into the copyright portion of the site, terms of use of the legal aspect of the site, you would find out that this is owned by Adobe. But from the face of it, from everything around it, you could not tell this was Adobe. And they pretty much did exactly what you're talking about. They brought together existing or retired marketers. So they brought in the former CEO, now retired, of General Mills, and the former CEO, now retired, of Pepsi. And they had them write, so that on the one hand, the people who were writing, their brand was still relevant even post-retirement, and then people who were their fans, maybe people who were their subordinates, maybe now they're reading the work regardless of not being in touch, and maybe that person's moved away to the other part of the country for retirement, whatnot. So they were connecting these two groups of people, and then as the comments section would roll in and people would start discussing or maybe arguing or maybe disagreeing with various aspects of what was being pushed out there. And obviously Adobe informed them in advance that you need to keep the topics around analytics and around analytics and using big data for immediate adjustment of your campaigns, because that's what the Adobe Marketing Cloud does. You can change your campaigns on the whim and on the fly and make it smart and all that. Mm-hmm. And that's how they brought together the idea that brand managers and marketing managers of companies like Pepsi, whatnot, were reading the articles, and then their former bosses were writing those articles, and they could see that the entire conversation happen right there. And then that became the most shared link in those companies, where people are like, get on this and defend our brand, or get on this and mention our campaign. And then Adobe was able to pitch to those people directly and say, now that you've signed up to our newsletter, here's what Adobe Marketing Cloud does. That concern you had, Adobe Marketing Cloud solves that. Even to the point where some people were, or I wouldn't say monetarily compensated, but they were rewarded for mentioning things like, this is a problem, and we wish this solution existed. And they did that purposely to see if people would respond, saying that in our dream reality, these three components would make up the solution that would solve all our problems in terms of justifying digital spend and justifying the reinvestment in digital. And that's where Adobe would come in and say, we've got this analytics tool, and that thing you were asking for, we have it, and we can implement it in about 3 months and all that. So that was a very good pre-sales process, I would say. But in the context of this, just so this is I would say a success. But in the context of this, and in the context of Adobe's product is really powerful and it's useful now, that There are a lot of companies out there right now. I'm just talking B2B right now. A lot of companies out there that are coming out with platforms along these lines where they haven't mentioned, as it would be in any other setting, paid content. So if I would put up, if I'm Samsung, and I want to promote my own brand, I'd go to New York Times, I'd go to all these publications, and I'd say, this is the content, and this is how the content links to your particular tone and narrative and all that in your current publication. I'd like you to publish it, but not write paid content. That ends up backfiring quite a bit, and it happens with a lot of companies. In the same context with CMO.com and Adobe, how would it have backfired? Is there an example where companies have misused customer trust and try to build on that, and possibly it hits them in the face when they realize the customers are more empowered?
Well, I mean, when that happens to you, you know that something's wrong with your product, right? I mean, so I always think of these sorts of things as being a mirror into your product, right? So companies that have very strong products, strangely enough, never have issues like that. So I'm always very reminded of of American Express, which is a very solid brand, very strong net promoter scores and so forth, right? And when they were thinking about joining the the Twitter sphere, right? They were very afraid that things will happen to them like this, right? American Express also opened their own, very similar along the lines you described, something called American Express Open Forum, right? Which was also sort of like dishing out advice around how to run small businesses and then connecting small businesses to each other, right? And they were very afraid that this is going to not work, and yet it worked really well. And one of the key reasons why it worked really well is that the product was solid, right? So, and for those, and then they really sort of made progress with this. And companies that don't have a strong product, right, or there's some real issues with how they run business, that gets very exposed very, very quickly. So I would say what social media ends up doing, and what these things that you and I have been talking about, what they do is they accentuate the differences between strong brands and poor brands.
Okay, great. So because we're short on time, just to sort of move it along, I would like just to know, in your time in this particular field and in consulting possibly and in teaching, and the sort of insights I'm sure you get from the class, from the MBA school, what kind of insights have you learned over the years that can be applied to large organizations, as long as the objective is to become more agile and to use, again, it's a two-part question, and to use the social networks to execute their strategies? So in your experience, what have you learned along these lines?
So one of the really interesting and important things that I found is that there is a very interesting organizational process that you need to go through in order to actually transform your company. And in fact, we're just rolling out, hopefully very soon at IMD, a program that actually sort of takes customers through the decision journey on how to implement social and digital in their organizations. And I think there's a couple of really important sort of considerations here. I think one of the most important considerations is that very often there's very little knowledge up in the higher ranks of the company on what actually needs to be changed. So what you need to do is you need to hire a lot of younger people to help you with that transformation. At the same time, a lot of these young people don't have the business acumen and the business experience yet to be actually able to implement from digital back into business objectives. So you need to have an organizational process that links these two people, right? So that's very important. But you also have to realize that as you do this, you're going to transform your business. So you're going to basically run into a lot of political resistance of people who say, look, we've been doing this business like this, it worked really well, why would we ever care to change it? Well, so you need to have an organizational process for overcoming that resistance, right? And really creating small wins to demonstrate to everybody very quickly that, the digital is actually the way to go forward. Which also requires, very importantly, the CEO to be championing this and really driving the process of digital change, because without that, there's really no big effect. So really having the sort of the key leadership buy-in into this and really championing this is absolutely critical.
Yeah, absolutely. In the Middle East, there's Unilever has now gone into e-commerce to a certain extent, so they're partnering up with existing e-commerce businesses. And I don't know how long it took and how many people had to be convinced, but it's a welcoming change. So what they're doing now is products that are just stapledly being purchased on a bi-weekly or twice a month sort of basis. For example, if you use a particular type of shampoo, you're probably going to use that shampoo then the next time, the next time, and the next time. So they're sending what's called family packs in the Middle East and Southeast Asia, where people are buying these small family packs with like 3 times 7, I guess. So you're buying 21 shampoos in a go, so you don't have to go to the store over and over again. Also keeping in mind, like you mentioned, if the infrastructure of the internet is not in place and other types of infrastructures are in place, then you get hampered with your business. So one of the main drivers of why people are running to the site and buying these things and buying bulk, obviously, first of all, is cost savings. Secondly, they have, again, because of cost savings, they don't want to drive too far. The roads aren't so good in their particular countries, so they don't want to go through the hassle of possibly having your car damaged, and various other aspects that are externalities that are not really reasons for them to want digital, but are, as a result of these unfortunate situations that they're in, they're buying into that. So Unilever has tapped into that opportunity that Reckitt and sorry to say, but Reckitt and P&G have not jumped into that just yet, but they have jumped into it for their hair care, their skin care, and I believe one other aspect of care. They're really targeting women on this front. So people are buying in bulk, and they just don't have to worry about going over the store over and over again. Another aspect of e-commerce that is taking off really well in the Middle East right now is groceries, because again, the reasons could be varied, but one of the reasons that I've seen prevalent in Dubai at least is that men and women are working at the same time, and especially if they have children, so they need a system that allows them to bring their staple items that they would buy on a weekly or monthly basis to be coming to the house and being stocked in the fridge and things like that. So along those lines, one of the things I wanted to talk to you about was, where do you see the future of something along the lines of Internet of Things, and how e-commerce companies like Amazon should be involved in it? So I'll give you a bit of an example of what I'm talking about. There is a lot of talk. There's a person named Adrian Siegel. She's the head of marketing for Adobe in Europe, and what she spoke about in a recent conference was a hope that in the future there will be refrigerators that, because of their RFID tags on your food, they would be able to tell you via message or via SMS or via email that you're running low on something. Just give us the approval, yes or no, to reorder this from Amazon. And then the person reorders it, and it gets to the fridge. That's human effort, getting it from the doorstep to the fridge. But that idea that you can know what you're running out of before you get home, that's something that they want to integrate into. So the question becomes, should companies like Amazon, should the e-commerce businesses invest into creating the refrigerators as their own projects, or should they partner up with companies like Samsung and Philips and others that create the refrigerators to do this? And then finally, who makes money? Does Amazon make money? Obviously, at the end of the day, do the refrigerator companies make money at the end of the day from the retailers and the grocery businesses? So how would this ecosystem work where we can have such an efficient process that you're basically living in the Jetsons world?
No, I think this is probably best done as a combination of the companies, right? It's very hard to believe that some of the big online retail companies like Amazon's or in China, Alibaba's of the world will directly get into that business, right? But having said that, it's obviously in their interest to develop more integrated joint ventures and deals that will actually facilitate those relationships. And so I think you'll see more and more of those happening, and I think many of them are already in the works, right? So, but the Internet of Things is still a few years away, but I think when it hits, I think we'll see the integration with the digital purchasing world very, very quickly.
Okay, I just have 2 more questions, and then I'm sure you've got a class or something to get to. First off, the first of the 2 questions is, how does IMD market itself in the social space in general, and then also within the social space? I mean, I go on the site and I can see everything I've got tomorrow's challenges on the front tab, and I was like, finally, someone wrote on marketing. After reading everything on economy and economic development, I finally read a post on marketing that was by you on Reckitt Benckiser. But along those lines, how would you say IMD markets itself? How the top business schools in the world should market themselves, and pull in that audience of the experienced MBAs and EMBAs. And the final question is, how would you, if you were the head of IMD, market it? Head
Well,
of marketing.
I will graciously decline this question just simply because I've only been here for a month.
Oh,
So
really?
yeah, so as you know, I used to teach at the Harvard Business School for many years,
Yeah.
and I've only moved to IMD for a month, so I really do not know the answer to that question.
Okay, okay. I'll change the question then slightly. You are put in charge of a new, and this is based on a real case. So you're put in charge of a new business school in Southeast Asia. How would you market it? And
Oh,
they just they just do
I
they just do
I can tell
MBAs.
you more abstract. Yeah. So and it's really interesting, right? So if you think about, there's two types of customers for any business school. There are the MBA students, and there is the executive education, right? And there's also undergraduates. But let's focus on the MBA students and executive education. So it's very clear that MBA students are very, very well informed audience who spend a lot of time on the internet. And so one of the key things that you want to leverage is not so much you talking about yourself, how amazing you are as a school, but really leverage key opinion leaders and really help you with marketing the school and really convince you that this is a good product for you, right? So a lot of these key opinion leaders are people like bloggers who blog about various programs. You obviously want to have some of your own students in the MBA program to be blogging and understanding, helping people understand what your program is all about, and then that will be sort of the first part of your strategy, right? For the executive education part of the world, again, you want bloggers to be able to talk about you, and you want to have a very, very active LinkedIn strategy. Because, as you probably know, a lot of companies are on LinkedIn, and a lot of people from those companies are engaging in group discussions on LinkedIn. So you want to become a part of that set of people conversing about education, and really to show the community what you can bring to the table. And I think LinkedIn, again, is a great opportunity particularly for executive education.
Okay, great. And the idea that a lot of schools do apply now. So like, I don't know who started. I don't know who started this trend, to be very honest. Harvard's got its Harvard Business Review. Wharton's got its magazine. MIT's got Sloan Management Review. IMD's got Tomorrow's Challenges. Not really a magazine. It's in a blog format, but sometimes it's so long that the articles are so long that you could count them as articles, not less as blogs. Along these lines, professors should be talking about themselves, or should the schools be marketing their students, keeping in mind that there's been a shift. What Professor Sasha Strauss of UCLA talks about, he says there used to be a time where whatever you said as a company, people would believe it. And now there's an era where people can question anything you say as a company because they can do the research and they can figure things out.
It's still very interesting, I think, for a lot of the schools to actually produce these, because that's the way we market our research, right? So we're teachers, but we're also researchers. So you want to have some easy access to our research. So I think both the online and the offline version of this research are very, very critical.
Okay, all right, cool. And there's this finally within the context of higher education, because it's a very controversial topic. It varies. We've got INSEAD here in Abu Dhabi. We've got New York University here in Abu Dhabi as well, and they're really struggling in this particular area. And when they talk around, the usual consensus becomes: should we invest into thought leadership? Either our students will be talking about it. Should we showcase our students as the asset of the company, of the organization? Like, look at the output that we created. This student has gone on to head this organization. Because what I'm trying to ask is, because there used to be a time where, because you were uninformed, other people were making decisions for you about what your education should be. Now, because of the internet, people are so well informed and they can get the information so easily perhaps they have a different objective in mind than other people would. So I'll give you a bit of example. So there's a elite business school in Pakistan that has been formed by one of the wealthiest families in Pakistan. Keeping that in mind, that it's formed by one of the wealthiest families, people are not going to them because the main reason is that they want a guarantee that they will get jobs and good jobs afterwards. So they're not looking so much at the idea that, oh, I can say I graduated from that school. That school, I would say, is equivalent to the American version of Yale. I'll put it that way. So it's not just about people. There used to be a time where people would say, I want to go to that school because I want to be able to say I graduated from Yale. The world has changed in that context. Now people are looking at the end return on investment, and they're asking themselves, how much will my salary increase? What kind of jobs can I get? What kind of outcomes can I have? So keeping in mind that the informed consumer has changed, and what we call the buying decision journey, the various touch points. So there used to be the time where your parents would pay your fees, your parents would decide the school you went to, the parents would decide what degree you had. Now that world has changed slightly. Keeping that in mind, how would you say higher education professionals, again, within the context of Southeast Asia, how do you think they should change the way they market their courses in terms of the medium, in terms of the message, in terms of the USP?
I still think that it's going to be very, very hard for any university to survive in the long term without having a strong research base, right? So even though, in the short run, students might care about, will I get or will I not get a job, right? If you stretch it out over 10 or 15 years, right, the recruiters very quickly learn who actually got good education and who got a poor education, and will continue to hire people from the good education universities. And it's very difficult to make a claim that we will give you a good education if there is no research background behind it, right? So I think what you will see is sort of an improvement in this area where the market will come into much more of an equilibrium, where schools that do a fair amount of research are also those that will attract the smartest students, and then therefore they will release the smartest students.
Okay, thanks very much, Professor. That was the end of my very extensive questions along these lines. Congratulations on the book. We'll be sharing the links in the description below for your book, and if those who want to buy it. A lot more examples along these lines. The professor has outlined examples from the likes of eBay, Zynga, as you mentioned, Cisco, as you mentioned, Pfizer. But I would say the examples he's given are good enough reason for you to be thinking about a peer-to-peer strategy, and what he mentioned earlier about consulting firms. At the end of the day, you're selling to people, so you may want to think about what triggers them. And it's not just about thinking about I'm going to be selling to a brand manager, or I'm going to be selling to a production manager or a CEO. You're selling to a person at the end of the day. So if you know the emotional triggers and if you know what they really want as people to get out of their social networks, perhaps you can help them gain their goals, and as a result, you would gain brand equity from that side. Is that a good summary, Professor? Would you like to add something to that?
Yes, thank you.
All right, great. Thank you very much for taking out the time, and I hope to have a different context and new interview with you within 3 to 4 months. We usually do as many interviews as we can with the professors and be able to pull you in here in Dubai to do one of our planned events. We bring in everyone we've interviewed, put them on a panel, and everyone who's watched the interviews who wanted to ask questions, and if I wasn't able to, I apologize to the viewers, I wasn't able to ask all the questions that they wanted me to. So we did be able to put you on a panel, and the people can ask anything they want to, as long as it's in the context of professional sphere. So anyway, thanks, Professor Isek. I'm mispronouncing it again. So we'll be speaking to you, I guess, over in September, so thinking about December, I guess. I'll be getting in touch.
Super. I look forward to it.
All right, thanks for taking out the time.
Thank
Goodbye.
You. Bye-bye.